Welcome to the Dolby Music Community Sessions. I'm Ben Guyvers with Dolby Creator Lab, and in this month's session, we have a fantastic lineup of special guests from Dolby sharing the latest and greatest updates from within the Dolby Atmos music ecosystem, including for the first time on the Music Community Sessions, Dolby's Director of Business Strategy and Planning for Dolby Atmos for Live, Mark Tuffy, is here to share details about the Dolby Atmos for Live music experience, including an overview of the tool set and workflow and how bands are using these technologies today to perform live in Dolby Atmos from the stage to the crowd. So you may have already experienced Dolby Atmos for Live music at the Dolby Live venue in Las Vegas, which is inside of the Park MGM. It's where acts such as Usher, Aerosmith, Imagine Dragons, and Maroon 5 have performed live in Dolby Atmos. And as mentioned, Mark will get into all of the details on that and how it works, and also share other ways that this technology is being used to bring Dolby Atmos live experiences to people in new and exciting ways. This is awesome stuff. Stick around for that. Also, Dolby's Jordan Glasgow is back to share updates to the Dolby Atmos Renderer and what's new in version 5.3.1. And as always, Greg Stryke Chin is here and brings back his Pro Tips series, this time getting into using your binaural rendering settings in Pro Tools, Logic Pro, Nuendo and Studio One. So great stuff as always from both of these guys. They'll all also be here for Q&A. So drop your questions in now for Mark, Jordan, and Greg, and be sure to add your name as well to your question. Before we jump into that, wanted to share some recently released video content from our activities at this year's South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, where we activated with one of our auto partners, Rivian, to showcase Dolby Atmos music and to highlight some of the great work that our friend Jim Eno is doing to support and empower the next generation of music creatives that are using Dolby Atmos. So to start with, this event marked the return of the Dolby Atmos Airstream trailer, which if you joined us at NAMM 2020 or the AMAs that year and some other events as well, you probably remember this Airstream with a fully integrated Dolby Atmos studio inside. Well, it's been completely redesigned and revamped by Dolby's Andrew and Emily, and they were both on site for the duration at Rivian's Electric Roadhouse with the trailer to showcase pieces of the Dolby Atmos music ecosystem, including a newly designed and integrated Atmos mix station demo, as well as Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision living room and mobile device demos. So guests could go from there to check out streaming Dolby Atmos music in the beautiful Rivian R1S and R1T vehicles with Rivian's premium audio with Dolby Atmos. We also held a full Dolby Day on Sunday, March 9th, which featured 2 panel discussions and a live performance by indie band Autumnal, who were also celebrating the release of their new track, Breathing, mixed in Dolby Atmos by Jim Eno. So Jim is an amazing musician, producer, mixer, and the founder of Project Traction, which is a nonprofit mentorship program created to provide women and gender expansive musicians with the tools and knowledge to become lifelong producers. Well, one of those producers is Sarah Hauser, who sat down with Jim and the members of Autumnal for a talk on empowering creatives through Dolby Atmos. And we have released this talk as a Dolby Creator Talks podcast episode, which you can catch on our YouTube channel or by searching for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also listen to Jim's Atmos mix of Autumnal's Breathing on Apple Music. And then Dolby Day continued with a talk led by Glenn Kaiser of Dolby Creator Lab on the future of in-car entertainment with Rivian's Michael Hong and Dolby's Aaron Venables and John Scott. And that was followed by an evening performance by Autumnal right on the stage there at Rivian. So we also dropped a short recap video covering those activities, so you can check that out as well, and also find the archive of all the Dolby Creator Talks at dolbycreatorlab.com. And huge shout out is mentioned to Andrew and Emily on the tech side, but also Amanda, Eric, Soraya, Aaron, and so many more at Dolby that made this happen. And super special shout out to Ed, our brand ambassador, who held it down doing demos in the Airstream for the week. All right, scan the QR code on screen now to opt into the mailing list to make sure you're up to date on the music community sessions, the tools updates, and more happening around Dolby. And of course, the Dolby Creator Lab is where you'll find the Dolby Music Essentials curriculum. That is free and available in multiple languages. And you can also find more music tutorials there as well, such as the Accelerator Program videos, which covers the basics for artists and engineers, everything from setup through distribution and devices. Wanted to also quickly mention some of the new technical guidelines articles that have been published in the Dolby Atmos Music Knowledge Base. These are around room design and calibration, which is always a very popular topic, but there are some newly published articles that you may want to see, including a great case study on converting a stereo mix room to Atmos. Also articles on speaker matching, SPLs, and bass management. Check that out at professional.dolby.com, and great work there as always by Bennett, Matt, and the entire team on those. Okay, in last month's session, we explored setting up a small Dolby Atmos home studio with Genelex's Paul Stewart and Dolby's Jonathan Lesner and Greg Stryke Chin. Thank you all for the excellent questions and engagement on that session, and you can still check that one out at our YouTube channel if you've missed it. All right, in this month's session, we've got Jordan Glasgow covering the Dolby Atmos renderer updates, Greg's pro tips for binaural rendering, and of course, Mark Tuffy on Dolby Atmos for live applications. Add your questions and we'll answer them shortly. All right, always a pleasure to welcome Dolby's Jordan Glasgow to the Music Community Sessions, I think for the first time this year, but Jordan, when you join, it usually means you're bringing with you some updates to the tools, but of course, you're always welcome to come and hang out anytime, man. So good to see you.
Thanks, Ben. Glad to be here, and sorry it's been a minute. We've been hard at work on some updates, and I can share a few of those now with you all. I hope by the time this airs that this release will be live. This is Dolby Atmos Renderer version 5.3.1, and it's a minor release that contains some compatibility improvements and bug fixes. So I'll just walk through them quickly, and then if you guys have any questions, we can answer them in the Q&A. So this release will officially support macOS Sequoia and a couple new machines, the new Mac Mini M4 from 2025 and the HP Z4 G5 workstation for all you Windows folks out there. And then a couple of bug fixes. One has to do with the Renderer Remote app and the Dolby Atmos binaural settings plugin, specifically on Windows. There was some issues there where connection could be a little bit unstable, so that's been resolved. And then there was also one, I believe on both platforms, whereby you could sneak in a spacebar push at a time when you shouldn't. So if you have a DAW connected to the renderer or the album assembler, and the external sync button was off, which it really shouldn't be in that case, but just in case that was a way you were working, you could accidentally hit the space bar when the renderer was focused, and that could cause some bad things to happen with metadata. So it's kind of a weird workflow because it's a bit of an edge case and something that maybe you shouldn't be doing, but it could accidentally happen. So anyway, that's been addressed, those two fixes and the compatibility stuff. We've also been hard at work on some other exciting things for the album assembler and also some updates for our DAW partners, which I can't quite talk about yet, but just wanted everybody to know that there's a lot going on in the background, and we will share more when we can.
Yeah, no doubt you guys have been hard at work. And of course, this version of the renderer fully compatible with the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler version 1.4. And I'm guessing also a free update for users that may be a couple of versions back, at least 5.0, right? So
yeah, it's a free update for anybody who's on renderer version 5.x.
Yep. And so if you don't already have that, you can get a free 90-day trial at professional.dolby.com. And we'll also put up a QR as well. And as Jordan mentioned, he will be here to answer questions. So if you've got those burning questions about the Dolby Atmos renderer or album assembler outside of roadmap, submit those for Jordan to answer here in a few moments. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
All right. The man in Miami, Mr. Greg Stryke Chin, is here as always. What's up, Greg? Great to see you, man.
You too, Ben. Always great to see you.
Awesome, man. So you are back with your pro tips, and we're going to focus on this topic over a couple of sessions because this is a really critical piece, right, to ensure that your creative choices are present, particularly in how listeners hear your composition when they're listening in headphones, and that's using your binaural rendering settings, right? So this is something that people should absolutely be leveraging when using a DAW with binaural rendering, such as Pro Tools, Logic Pro, Nuendo, Studio One, for example. But you can also use the external renderer, and there are some other solutions out there in the marketplace. But for today, we're going to focus on 4 workstations with internal binaural rendering, right, for Atmos. So this is a good one, man. Take it away.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Ben. So yeah, as Ben said, binaural settings, really important for that, binaural headphone experience specifically. And I think it's one of the things where, when folks get into creating and mixing and working in Dolby Atmos, we're so involved in what's going on in terms of objects and beds and where things are going to go. We get really kind of wrapped up in that in the best possible way. But when we get to our deliverables, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we might forget a little bit about what happens in terms of the translation to headphones and that binaural experience. So one of the things we've done at Dolby, obviously translation is really important. And we want to make sure that when a listener is going to experience Dolby Atmos in a binaural setting, most likely headphones, that all of that goodness that you've all created in terms of the mix translates in terms of that immersive environment, right? In a pair of headphones. So to do that, what we've done is we've added binaural controls for the binaural mix. Now, what we've done is we've kind of aggregated it down to just a couple of settings that will automatically, take that information and get as close as possible and really do a good job of that in terms of where things are placed. So today we're going to focus specifically on how to leverage those binaural controls using internal rendering. So we're going to go through a couple of different DAWs. In the next one, we'll talk about setting up the external renderer using the binaural plugin with some of the DAWs. And then for another one, we'll take a look at how you can leverage some really great third-party tools to even take that workflow out a little bit more. So today we're going to focus just on internal rendering, and we're going to start right here in Pro Tools. Now, I've got a session up. This is actually a session a mix that I've delivered a few months ago. And, it's really also important that when you're delivering mixes that you make sure you check the deliverable requirements. So different labels will have different requirements, but usually you'll find that when it comes to the binaural settings, that some amount of, using different settings is required. Again, it's really there to make sure that you're considering where those objects or where items in the bed lay inside of the immersive space. So let's go ahead and take a look at Pro Tools. Now, just a few months ago, Pro Tools updated obviously they launched internal rendering back in 2023.12. They've continued to iterate and improve on bringing different levels of control in. One of the things I've added is the ability to handle your binaural settings directly right in the editor range window. So if I just take any one of these tracks here and expand it, you can see that. So I've got this track here. This is a vocal track, a little reverse vocal. And this one lives in the bed, as you can see here. But you can see here that my binaural settings are immediately available to me. And if I go ahead and just click that, I get to select off, near, mid, or far. You can see that I've got this set to mid. Now, I know we're going to cover the external render workflow next, but I just wanted to show you with it so it's not smoke and mirrors. If I go ahead and go to Setup, go to I/O, and if I go to my Dolby Atmos tab and change to the external renderer, and let me go ahead and launch that to make sure we've got it connected. Here she goes. That's now connected. If I go ahead and now switch to the external renderer, you'll see that my binaural settings goes right away. Why? Because if I'm using the external renderer, we'll use a combination of either the renderer or the binaural plugin to handle those changes. So let's go ahead and switch right back to internal rendering. I just, again, wanted to show you that. Again, because sometimes that can get a little confusing, folks, especially for folks who are going back and forth between internal rendering and using the external renderer. So we go back to the internal renderer, and again, my binaural settings comes right up. So it's a cool little visual. Of course, you can go. Here's an object here. I can go ahead. This is another vocal. If I wanted to change that setting and change that to far, very easy. I just click on far, and while I'm in the session, I get a really quick visual as to where things are by a different color. So you get a little visual representation of kind of where things are in terms of your binaural settings. So that's Pro Tools. I'm going to switch over to Logic now. So I just want to go through a couple of different DAWs here. So we have a session here in Logic Pro, Apple Logic Pro, and we've got some stuff in the beds. We've got some stuff that's assigned to objects, so you can see here. And to go ahead and find our binaural settings in Logic Pro, very simple. We'll just go ahead and click on the renderer, pull that up, and your binaural rendering settings are right here inside the renderer. You can see we're actually leveraging the Dolby renderer, and you can make all your changes right here, off, near, mid, far. You'll also notice that LFE is automatically going to be off. You can't change that. LFE is what it is. So there will be no, bass is omniscient and omnipresent. So that's going to just exist everywhere. So we don't have to worry about a setting for that. But you can see here that in Logic, it's broken up into your bed. You can make some changes if you needed to there. Very easy. And your objects. So we have 4 objects here in the session. So those objects now populate here, and we can change those as need be. So off, near, mid, and far, right? Those are pretty self-explanatory. Off. Now, one of the things I will mention that if you leave everything off, a lot of times, even though you're in an immersive mix, one of the things that will probably happen is that things will feel relatively flat and maybe kind of on top of each other. So it really is a good idea to leverage the binaural settings, so you can get that sense of where things should be within the space, and you can play with that. I usually tend to set things a little bit like to mid, and then as I'm getting into my mix section, I'll go back and forth. Some people will go and do all the binaural changes at the end, after they've kind of finished their mix. I tend to go back and forth a little bit, so I'm making those decisions as I'm going through. But that's what it looks like in Logic. So next, we're going to go over to Steinberg Nuendo. And here, it's a little bit different. Obviously, in Nuendo and in Cubase as well, you've got internal rendering. And of course, you have your renderer available to you, and there that is. But that's actually not where you're going to find your binaural settings. You don't really find it here in the track list either. There's a specific workplace for that. And that workspace, you just click on workspace and you're going to go to ADM authoring. So the way that Steinberg handles it, they figure that the binaural, since you're going to be exporting a binaural wave, this is where you'll make those decisions. So once you pull up the ADM authoring window, you'll see here that I've got some my bed, some objects, and there are my binaural settings. Very easily can set them here, and of course, listen back and check those out. And it's that simple. And of course, you can then export an ADM. You can go ahead and export your binaural wave. So it's that simple. Now, again, I do recommend, as you're making those changes, listening to them, QCing that in real time and checking that out. And it's that simple. So I'm showing Nuendo, Steinberg's Nuendo here, but it's the same workspace type of window in Cubase as well. Okay. Now we're going to go over to our last one, and certainly last, but definitely not least, Persona Studio One. So I've got a couple of tracks here, and actually right now everything exists in the bed. But first, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the renderer, because that's where we'll find our binaural settings in Studio One. So right here on our kind of our renderer module here, I just go ahead and click on it. That pulls up the renderer. And you can see that our binaural mode exists right here to the right of the actual renderer visual, right? So we can make our changes here. Right now, I've got everything in the bed. What I wanted to do here is just quickly show you what happens when we go ahead and turn one of our bed tracks into an object. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll just choose this track 4 here. I'm just going to right click on the panner, and we're going to go ahead and move it from a surround panner to a spatial object panner. That will automatically turn it into an object. And you can see here now in our renderer, that object, which is now object 4, is right here and available to me. And I can go ahead and make that change in that section right there. So we've broken up my beds and objects. So a lot of familiarity between the DAWs that have internal rendering, of course, because it's internal and integrated into those DAWs. Every company kind of chooses and makes some decisions so that things kind of feel very connected and to the workflow in that DAW. So a little bit, a lot of differences, but a lot of similarity as well. That's pretty much it. Of course, again, make sure you're checking your mixes as you're going through both your full immersive mix and your binaural mix. And, you get to play around with that and make the best possible decisions. But I promise you that leveraging the binaural mode will really help enhance that binaural playback. So again, today what we've done is we've gone through a few different DAWs, Pro Tools, Logic Pro, Steinberg Nuendo, and Persona Studio One, and shown how you can leverage the binaural mode internally using internal rendering. So next time we'll go ahead and show off external rendering, the external renderer with some of the DAWs, show how to set it up, and show you how you can leverage that and get those mixes, both your immersive mixes and your binaural mixes, sounding great. Thank you so much. Of course, send in your questions. Happy to answer any of those. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ben.
Thanks, Greg. Really great stuff there. Really important stuff, because you're taking control over how the, listening experience is going to ultimately present on headphones. And I think it's really critical. And one of the things that you said is that there's consistency across these platforms because this is Dolby's binaural settings in here as well. So these HTRF filters are ones that we've developed and that we've, worked with these workstations to make sure that they're integrated correctly. So you can ensure that whichever workstation you're using that has, Dolby's binaural rendering in there, you're going to have that consistency and it's going to give you more control. And you also mentioned that many of the labels and services are requiring these binaural metadata settings to be present in the delivery. And so that's really critical too. And that doesn't mean everything's set to off, right? That means that you've actually made some decisions for that headphone experience, because it should present in a way that's as true as possible to, the artistic intent and the creator's vision. So awesome stuff, Greg. Looking forward to the next one, man.
Appreciate you. Thanks.
So happy to welcome to the Dolby Music Community Session, Dolby's Director of Business and Strategic Planning for Dolby Atmos for Live, Mr. Mark Tuffy. Mark, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for managing to get my very long title, an unwieldy title, correct. I'm just Mark. That's the easy way to do it. There you go.
Well, thank you, Mark, and happy to do it. And you have that long title because you're doing such cool and important things. And they've actually let you out of the Mark Tuffy Executive Suite in Las Vegas, and you're back home, right?
That's correct. Yes, just back from Las Vegas. We were working with Maroon 5, the latest act that's at Dolby Live. There are a couple of acts coming up that I can't really say too much about just now, but it's an exciting time and lots of new acts, lots of different genres of content, ranging from rock to pop to R&B. So lots of very exciting things happening, and we'll get a little bit into what's in that venue and what we've done.
Yeah, man, super exciting. So stay tuned to find out who's going to be at Dolby Live. But excited to have you share some of the other things that you're doing in terms of live application and workflow outside of just music, but really want to get into a little bit of the background on sort of the Dolby Atmos music experience and how we got to where we are today. I think, some of the origins aren't really all that well known outside of Dolby. So maybe you can share a little bit about, how internally some of the live workflows came together and how things developed.
Yes. So this really, as an initiative, we'll call it that, it started back in 2019. There was some work that I was asked to look at in the cinema business group, because I actually work in what's called cinema and group entertainment. And that group, the head then asked me, could you look at how we can expand out what we do in group entertainment? And there were a couple of areas I looked at. The one that seemed to really resonate the best with our technologies, what we do for connecting multiple fans to sort of artists, was live music, was concerts. And then so I started to investigate that more and really found that the desires, the intent, the perception of quality that people wanted from concerts is actually closely aligned to cinema. And it's very similar demographics of people that attend both areas. So that we started to look at what could we do in that space, and started to use some off-the-shelf products to be able to do that. In no way were they optimized, but it was to be able to create what we call a proof of experience. So we took some off-the-shelf products and really trialed that out with some some helpful musicians, and really we got a sense of, oh, there could be what we call a there. There could be something exciting in doing something with Atmos live. Now remember, Dolby Atmos was always made for pre-produced content, and we do have some live work for broadcast, but never the tools used for doing live music production in terms of live presentation. So we had to do a little bit of work with the version of the cinema renderer that we had at that time. And some very clever engineers managed to go in there and essentially reduce the latency and got us to a point where we said, well, we can try this out. And we did it in two ways. First thing that we did was that we started working with Live Nation for a proof of concept in Las Vegas with Carlos Santana. And in parallel, we worked on the American Music Awards. So this is late 2019, right before the world shut down for quite a while. And the notion is that we ended up doing those two things almost identically in time. The first one with the American Music Awards set up a Dolby Atmos system and invited all of the acts who were performing at the AMAs that year, if they'd like to perform in Atmos. We had a number who did. Post Malone, Dua Lipa, Lizzo, all performed in Dolby Atmos, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. All of the acts wanted to utilize Dolby Atmos, and in fact, a few of them were slightly annoyed with their manager that they had been offered the opportunity, but they passed it up, which is good. It proved that creatively they're excited. And at the same time, we were doing this proof of concept with Carlos Santana. I'd had the opportunity to present Carlos in Las Vegas what we were doing, what Dolby Atmos was, and he got very excited. I spent a long time sitting in actually a cinema with Carlos going over Dolby Atmos and presenting to him. And then we took the technology, the sort of proof of experience element that we had, and brought that into to the House of Blues in Mandalay Bay. That was a system that we really worked with the house on. We created a system where we used the left and rights that were there. We had to put a center array in, a delay center for the balcony, some speakers around the dance floor there, and then speakers around the balcony as well, and gave Kevin Madigan, the mixer, essentially some rudimentary tools and allowed him to mix. And that was the inception, Ben, of Dolby Atmos for Live, as what we call it now, and the creation of that experience. It was a pretty exciting time.
It really was. And I was around in the Muse days and was actually a part of that team, which, you know, some of the technology that we were pioneering there sort of came over to what would become the live space. But I did see a few of those early iterations, such as the Meek Mill show at Neuhaus that we did, yes, and a couple of other things around that time, and could really see the promise of, you know, what Dolby Atmos for live could be. And I think, you know, this was, like you mentioned, 2019. So, you know, Amazon and Tidal had just come online. And so streaming Dolby Atmos music was available. Some of the club things were happening, but there was kind of this missing experience, if you will, of like where we could go with live. And I think that things really started to take shape around that time. And then, of course, you know, COVID hit and we had to pause some things, but you guys continued to be quite busy with, you know, the pioneering work that you were doing and laying the groundwork for what would become Dolby Live, which I'm sure those discussions were already happening with, you know, the Park MGM way back then. But take us into kind of like the Dolby Live space and the system there. And, you know, I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of like the design of the room and what it takes, like the tools and the processes to design, you know, a space like that for an Atmos experience.
So, Ben, I do want to go back a little bit before I really delve into that. You're absolutely right that we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? You know, everything that we do is a progression of what's happened before. And the work that Ben and a lot of people did on Muse was the real nexus, the beginning of all of this, because electronic music, I don't want to say it's the easiest way because I don't want to make it sound, downplayed, but I mean, because of electronic music, you have more opportunity to do things with Dolby Atmos at the very beginning. And the work that Ben and that team did with Muse was really fundamental in it, because that was us learning and understanding what could you do in an experience where there was a crowd and you were playing Dolby Atmos. And we built off of that. There were things that the team learned. There were portions of the tools that the concepts are still used to this day. I'm really dying for the day in which we could actually have a DJ performing at Dolby Live. You know, that's still a little dream in the back of my mind. But it really was the nexus of it, and that led to, you know, through those proof of concepts to what we now have at Dolby Live. And those discussions had started when the pandemic started, and, you know, we're all sort of stuck at home. the nice thing about the way that the world is with this kind of thing here is that you really can communicate, you can do business, and you can talk to people and ideate on things, and sometimes not be able to be in the same room. And that was where a lot of the discussions with our partners at MGM Resorts started, discussing about, well, Atmos, this could be a very interesting technology for the live space. And they had the Park Theatre there, which already had gained a pretty good reputation there for hosting acts maybe punching slightly above its capacity and weight for the venue. And we really started to look at that venue together, both sides, and say, well, what could be done here? We had all this learning and experience. We then had the opportunity to begin to develop the technology for Dolby Atmos for live, when we knew there was a space and a partner who was really invested in wanting to do this. It allowed us to think differently. So delving into the room a little bit, the room is a pretty complex thing. It's the largest instantiation of it's the largest instantiation of Dolby Atmos that we currently have. The AMAs was slightly bigger in terms of volume at 9,000, but as anything running today, it's the largest one. And that creates some challenges. Number one challenge is size, literally the size of the room. Normally, when you're doing Dolby Atmos in some sort of group setting like a cinema, it's fairly constrained. Cinemas don't go mega size. You don't find 5,000 people cinemas, generally speaking, or 20,000 people. There's venues that are doing 60,000, 100,000 people. So dealing with the fact that Dolby Live is let's just say a 5,500 roughly capacity size venue, it was a challenging element to think of for, first of all, just acoustical delay. When you're firing something off at almost 200 feet away on one side of the room and someone's on the other side and you want to hear it, how do you actually make sure that things stay in time? That was the number one challenge. The number two challenge was, how do you create an Atmos experience for everybody in the room? It's with a room that size, then because of this challenge of the acoustic delay, then how do you create the element that makes sure that everybody in each space gets this great experience? And that was my sort of mandate to the team. My mandate to the team was that, generally speaking, when you go into a live venue, what you generally pay a little bit more for is what I call proximity to the king or queen. You're closer to the stage, you're there for the proximity, but that doesn't mean you should get a worse audio experience if you can unfortunately only afford the last seat in the balcony at the top. I've had that happen, right? I've sat in the last seat in the balcony in the top, and sometimes it doesn't sound great. So my remit to the team was, we have to have a system that means if you're tucked under the balcony or up at the top, everybody gets an amazing audio experience. That should sort of be democratized, the ability for great audio. So with Dolby Live, it's an interesting space. It's a space that is fan-shaped and is about 200 feet wide at the widest point, which does cause problems in terms of system design, because you have the laws of physics and the propagation of sound in air. And that what that really means is that if someone is on the left side of the venue and you're playing an object, you really want to make sure that someone on the right side can hear that in time with the rest of the music going on. You don't want there to be a delay there, and that's a major problem. So we did have to spend some time really looking at the venue and saying, well, we can't make this one continual system. It's not like a small cinema. We've got to do something relatively unique. So it is a complex system. And we actually took the room and broke it down into little mini zones. So what we have here is, I've got an image here that really shows sort of an overview. We called this the system layout. This is a document that we provide to front of house engineers and to their team to really bring them up to speed with what's in the venue, because it's pretty complex. So what's in the room? It's pretty, like I said, it's a lot of speakers. We added about 400 loudspeakers into that venue. The left and rights were already there, although we enhanced them a little bit. But we put a lot of speakers in the room because we wanted to be able to really deliver on the promise of Dolby Atmos, right, Ben? Because the promise of being able to play something anywhere in the room that you would like, with the same level output, with the same fidelity. No, this is not going from a massive line array down to a computer speaker once you get off the stage. So you actually, as we talk about this, you'll see that as you move out into the venue and you move away from the stage, we have systems there that are designed to make sure you can do that with the same timbre and output level. So they're pretty stout when it comes to the surrounds. And we split the room into multiple zones as well because of that delay issue, making sure you could split the room into multiple zones and essentially make mini Atmos zones so that people anywhere in the venue could actually get a look at it. So I know that one of the big things that people are interested in is how many speakers have we got? What have we really got here? So what we've got in here, this sort of lays it out. The red ones there, they're line arrays, right? So we have 3 sets of K2 line arrays that are there. I believe it's 16 boxes per hang. I think 16 boxes per hang of K2 line arrays. We did this because that left and right in the venue, people are used to a stout left and right array. They want the kick, right? So bringing someone in and seeing a left and right array that looks very similar to a stereo one, then immediately they're comfortable. And we augmented that with that center stack that's pretty much the same. We definitely put more subs in the room. We actually have on the ground there where it's blue, that is 28, what they call KS28s. They're twin 18s. So we have 28 twin 18s on the bottom for the low end of the system in the room. Let's just say she slaps. It is loud in that room when it goes. You know, Usher with Kyle Hamilton, that was I don't think I've ever felt my diaphragm bent moved as much as when that room was playing like that.
And those are L-acoustic boxes, right?
This is all L-acoustic. So the reason being that the venue had spent a little bit of money on their left and right to raise L-acoustics just prior to Dolby coming in. And so the best thing was to enhance it with the same product family, keep the tonality the same, make it much easier to set it up. And in the tours, it's a very rider-friendly box in L-acoustics. So people were excited with that. The greens on the side, as you see, there's little boxes on the side. Those are the surround arrays. They're actually slightly smaller boxes with bass management, if I scroll down here so I remember correctly. So there we go. So we've got the wides, which are Cara 2s and SB28s. They're the smaller L-acoustic subs. The outfills, 14 Cara 2s. So these are your outfills here, because there is a point at which we deliberately make the speakers overlap. That's unusual for live. So I should point this out. Normally when people do a live system, they're creating a system where they're looking for absolute coverage. So they'll have a speaker and then they'll have the next set of speakers to cover this area and cover this area. Atmos is totally different. We're not designing for stereo. So we deliberately have it so that the speaker patterns actually overlap deliberately, because we're wanting to make sure, for example, the left line array, someone on the right can hear it. Within a certain, we have a tolerance of how much we allow it to drop. And it's only when you get outside of that tolerance level that you actually start using things like outfills to make sure. So the same with the surrounds as well. These surrounds are fairly stout surrounds that we have here. Here are the side surrounds, 12 Cara 2s and 4 SB28s. So the Cara 2s, as people know, are smaller boxes than the K2s. But when you take 12 of those on each side, as each line array on the side, and those 4 SB28s, that actually gives you the same output as this stage main you see up here where it says 16 K2s. So it gives you the same oomph. The goal being, as you move something off of the stage, right? We move something off of the stage here and you move it around, then you get the same oomph from all of these loudspeakers that you get from the front, this is key. And then we get a little bit into this section here, this curved section here. This is the balcony lip. So we put stuff on the balcony lip because we wanted to make sure that people in the VIP sections on the floors got the ability to hear the content from the rear surrounds, obviously. And you needed to split them because you need a near and far throw. So we got each of those locations has split speakers. They're point sources for near and far throw. We have line arrays in the roof for the overheads. So there's actually 6 here. It's a little bit hard to see, but these two little gray dots, they're actually for the balcony. So there's a 0.2 for the balcony, you would call it, in terms of overheads, and a 0.4 notionally for the main floor. Although I should point out, people ask me all the time, what's the loudspeaker configuration of this room? I say there's 430 odd loudspeakers in this room. That's the configuration. Because it doesn't conform to 712, 914. It doesn't, when we think of the music stuff, Ben, you guys have worked on as well, a 714 or 512, it doesn't conform to that. The closest thing I could say is I believe, if I get this right, and Cameron on my team will probably slap me because I'll probably get it wrong. I believe we're 23.1.4, technically speaking, for the main floor, I think. But then under balconies, and the balconies we split down into smaller elements. That's where we talk about the zoning. right? So we split down into this zoning for
You've
that
got
space.
multiple configurations in one space,
We
so
do,
that experience
yes.
is going to be consistent wherever you are.
Absolutely. To show that, here we go here. So under the balcony, this is the one time where I'll actually concede that we do have what you would consider a traditional format. Is under the balcony, we split it into these multiple zones of 512. And when you're in the venue, you can actually see we're very fortunate that each one of those areas that you see that are colored differently, there's a distinct break there because that's a egress for the people to come in. That's essentially a door and a walkway. So that's actually it was quite useful. And we have a system that essentially under each one of these areas is custom tuned, custom balanced because you're out of different speaker alignment points. You know, you're being occluded from a different speaker in a different position. So each one of those are actually completely treated separately as individual 512 zones. I've heard people say that some of the best sounding seats that they have heard are actually underneath the balcony there because it's closer, and we actually use smaller near field speakers because you don't need to have a huge line array there to get the same output and timbre because it's all base managed, so we have smaller speakers there. So we do split it all there. So that's just the loudspeakers and the amplifiers. And then we get into all the fun stuff, which is the rendering and everything too, which is a pretty cool part of it as well. There's also maybe one thing I'd like to share about is how we make this happen, right? There's one thing which is really, there's loudspeakers in the room, but they're, with all due respect, they're the last point in the chain, because there's all this work that's happened with the act and how it actually integrates and what it actually really means. And then there's the magic, the secret sauce, really, which is around about our rendering and our technology that's put in it. So I'll delve a little bit into that. What we have is that we really have our own rendering platform. As I said, this started off very much related to the cinema renderer, and those people in this document is actually just being updated. But those people who may know a little bit of history with Dolby will probably recognize that box on the top of going like, that looks like a Dolby RMU. That's because at the beginning, that was the hardware platform that we chose to use. Very robust, used in post for many years for doing feature production. So we knew it could stand the test of time and the punishment that a live experience would provide just as a hardware platform. But we adjusted the renderer there because a lot of things that you need specifically for live work. It has to be low latency, right? Post-production, we don't worry about that. Even when we're doing this recording, if you have a problem, you can stop it and, shock horror people, this is not all one take. I'm not, this is not adolescence. I'm not that good,
You're pretty good.
Yeah, but not as good as adolescence, So the point being that you could take the renderer, we actually had to work on it to make it low latency so that you really could ensure that when someone's playing guitar, you're not playing guitar and then 5 seconds later the sound comes out of the speakers. And we also had to work on ensuring, in the terrible situation that something does go wrong and you lose the metadata for movement, how do you make sure for things continue? So we modified the render again to make sure that if there was a loss of communication, the show would still go on. Very important, right? Redundancy is key. But then we created this new thing, which was really based again on the inception was the work that a lot of the people in the Muse team had pioneered, which is this notion of the content creation tools for live performance. And we created this thing we called the Live Panner. Really, it was a notion of what's the best way for a mix engineer to work. It's a mix engineer, they're that trusted link between the band and the artist. And that's really what we are trying to do with Dolby Atmos in the venue of Dolby Live, right? This is not about, look how great the Dolby is. We're creating the ability for a greater emotional connection between the fan and the artist. I make the point as I work in the cinema business group, but it's not like I get to see Tom Cruise act out Mission Impossible in front of me when I go to the cinema, right? He's a representation on the screen. He's not live doing it. When I go and see a live show, there's the act. This is the emotional. This is my memories. This is unique for me at this time. So the tools are very important because that trust is being built between the artist and the fans. And that control is being presented and is being seeded by the act to the front of house engineer, very strong bond of trust. So we created a tool called the Live Panner, which I'll go deeper into a little bit. But essentially it's an iPad because the mix engineers, we didn't want to mess around with their desk. They've got all the stuff that they love to do. They've got the reverb, their compression, how they bus, Everything is, so they can, when they found out, we're saying, well, you don't have to touch your desk. We're not, we'll maybe route it to us slightly differently than how you're used to routing, but we're not asking you to change anything on your desk. Great. And the iPad app is the way in which you actually control everything to do with Atmos. That's how you control movement. That's how you control placement. You can do automations. You can build up things that our team calls events. I call them macros because I'm an old guy. Right? And when you program something as a macro, but that's really an event, snapshots, pan events, all of this is built up in this iPad tool. And the pan server is the thing that essentially communicates and controls between the system and the renderer. And so it really frees the mix engineer up, because we can do work with them at the beginning and say, how do you actually want to set up this show? And they can create elements and have them ready to go. They can pan in real time. Aerosmith would give the SE the iPad and a couple of songs and just say to them, well, go wild. And of course it's an iPad, so it's touch control. So you just go, I think it was during Hangman Jury, I think it was, they were doing that. But then you can do the thing completely synced to timecode. Completely synced to timecode. You can take the iPad, put it in the drawer, and off you go and watch it. So it's a pretty robust system that we've built, and we've been very fortunate that we are now at 177 Dolby Atmos shows at Dolby Live. No major Atmos system failures. So I'm just, this is the closest thing I've got to wood. So very, very fortunate that it's a testament to the hard work that, again, building on the shoulders of giants, the work that Muse, and then with us being able to work with our engineering team to create something that was this robust.
Really, really cool. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about sort of the prep work that maybe the band and the engineers do together kind of before they go live. I mean, you mentioned that it triggers macros in some cases and things like that. But as they're thinking about like preparing for the experience, like what sort of things are they thinking about, and how is the band thinking about how they're going to, create this experience for their fans?
The pre-production time, this is true for any kind of immersive work that you do with Atmos, right? You really want to spend a little bit of time in pre-production and getting your concepts together, what it is that you want to do. So when we work with each act that performs at Dolby Live, we introduce the notion of almost an audio pre-production, which is not normal for for live shows. There'll be a visual pre-production, there might be pyro, but not really audio pre-production in the same way. So the first thing that we do is we bring in, we do education. So we educate the artist if they do not know about Dolby Atmos. We're fortunate though, because it's Dolby and there's a large music sort of ecosystem that we have built. There are many artists and their team who already know about Dolby Atmos. So we've been fortunate. For example, Maroon 5 and the guys, they already knew a lot about Dolby Atmos coming in, but some people don't. So the first thing is education. And teaching them about what the technology is and helping them understand it's a creative tool for them to use. It is not creation. Creation is what they do. That process still stays the same. Our job is being able to provide them the ability to create a new experience, but we are not the creative. So I think that's the very first thing, is that we just have to get out of the way so that people don't get scared. And then we go into a process of teaching the front of house engineer about Dolby Atmos. We bring them in, we show them how the technology works. We mostly do demos for them, and then we actually bring this app that we've got here, and we show the front of house engineer how it operates. And we start with them bringing their console in, and they can start building up their console session. So it's very simple things. We start off with the notion of what's a bed, why might you use a bed, what's an object, why might you use an object? And you just slowly bring it up, because some of these people may have only ever mixed in dual mono. So then as they begin to understand that, I still have my channels, I can do the stuff I want to do, I still have my stuff on my console, and then I have the ability to move stuff around quickly, they begin to get it. The penny drops. You see that with each front house team and artist. So then we give them all of these tools, and we give them these, and they can run. They have a local version they can run on their laptop, and we actually give them the ability to, if they want to audition some stuff over headphones, then they can. We don't recommend that they build their whole show up using headphones, obviously, because the space is very different, but it's a good tool for them to be able to understand how things work. So then they begin to build up the show, mostly from virtual sound checks, Ben. So that's the first, it's a really good thing. That's one of the benefits of the live world, is they can take a recording that they had of a set from 2 months ago. They already know the set, they know the songs that are going to be played, the arrangements, and then they can actually start building up Atmos movements and positions based on virtual sound checks, because they can say, oh, well, for the synth, yeah, in this song, we want the synth to do this, or place this here, and we want the guitars to be here. And they can build it up per song. And that's what we do with them, is we help them. They build up per song how they want their snapshots, which is positions they might want to snap to, what elements may they want to move or place in space. So they can go as granular as just the guitar or a cymbal, or they could go, here's the whole drum kit, and I move the whole drum kit as an object. So we walk through that process with them. Again, our job is to help them understand technically how the tool works, but we sit with them and chat with them and say, here's how you can achieve, stemming out to the guitars. So if you want to do more clever things there. So we walk through them with the virtual sound check. Once they are happy with that and they've got their console sessions, then when we go to rehearsals, we do some pre-production work with them. Then we actually send a team and we send a small Dolby Atmos system down to rehearsals. That's where the rubber really begins to hit the road. And that's where some of the fun stuff happens, because then the front of house is working with the band as they are preparing for their shows. And that's the first time that the band actually gets to hear what's happening in Dolby Atmos. And that's been very satisfying, whether it's been Joe Perry and Steven Tyler at Aerosmith in Boston, or whether it's been Mariah Carey and their team in Los Angeles, or it's been Usher and his team in Las Vegas. Each time you're able to sort of bring a system in, and then the act is able to actually listen, and then they begin to actually give feedback to the front of house engineer, because they begin to get excited because they're hearing their content, they're hearing their performance in a different way, and they start to then interject. That's when you tend to find the front of house engineer contact us and go, oh, well, so-and-so heard this and they really want to do this stuff. And they begin to ask the rest of their the sort of team, can we make sure the front of house engineer has access to this virtual soundtrack thing stemmed out so he knows all these elements? So they really begin, depending on the act and the artist, obviously, Ben. Some people go super deep, right? Usher went super deep. I had the privilege of one time when we were just doing a demo for him, and he stopped the demo and he wanted to get super deep right there into prepping some of the songs for the residency. And so I just sat back and watched, and the level of detail that he was going into, talking to Kyle Hamilton, his front of house, of like, Kyle, I want this song, I want this, know where it goes, do, I want it to do this. And then on the second one, I want it to do this. And so he was going super, you could just see an artist at work at that point, where creatively their brain was firing. And that's where a lot of the secondary work of we call it pre-production, because then they get to hear some of the stuff actually when we go in venue. So we do a staged process. It's education, starting out getting the front of house engineer trained up on Dolby Atmos, working then with virtual sound checks and the band at rehearsal, then coming to load in, and then they do rehearsals as well. And a lot of times they're recording those rehearsals, and then what will happen is the band will then come and sit in Dolby Live and listen to that recording, and then give some creative feedback to the front of house engineer as well. So it's an iterative process. And because we're fortunate at the residencies, you always find that it evolves. The mix, the Dolby Atmos mix, evolves over time, because they start off doing one thing and then say, oh, well, this is really interesting. That worked, and maybe we could do this. And we always find this. I was actually talking to Paul Falcone, the Mariah Carey front house engineer, yesterday about this, and he was saying, he was amazed because he found that his concept, the creative stuff that happened between him and the band, was actually changing as the residency was going on. There was doing more things and adapting. And so the Atmos mix actually for live doesn't stay a static thing. It kind of lives and evolves as the band and the front of house engineer does more and more, which I think is a very cool and unique thing. Every live performance is unique, but it's even more interesting as the actual way in which the mix happens organically evolves during the show.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that, and congratulations on everything you and your team have achieved and will continue to. And, looking forward a little bit, essentially like the Dolby Atmos Live Panner could be used to transform a room into a fully immersive Atmos performance space for not only live music, but for like theater or, a live sporting event or something like that. For example, you've got the, King Lear Broadway performance at the Shed in New York City, right? And so can you share a little bit about some of the other applications that, Dolby Atmos for live applications can sort of be leveraged for, and what you're excited about that you can share in the future?
Yes, that's a good, I'm glad you asked that question, because we've spoken a lot about music, and absolutely music is the core driver of this. But of course, Dolby Atmos, it's not just for music. Otherwise we wouldn't have it in 8,000 cinemas and, almost 300 Dolby cinemas. We wouldn't have it in, Netflix and all these, Disney Plus and all these years. It was just for music, much as we all absolutely all love music. But Dolby Atmos for live is the notion there is it's actually in the title explicitly. It's not Dolby Atmos for live music. It's Dolby Atmos for live, because there are many different types of live experience. There are stage performances, like I said, esports, which people don't really sort of coin as being live, but, esports, opera, live sporting events. So we have been looking to see, now that we've got this great foundation in music, and we've been able to really get something that works and, provide this incredible experience, what are other types of content that can work? And we did do King Lear with Kenneth Branagh. We did 50 shows in New York just at the end of 2024. Completely different experience, and stressed the tools in a different way. Because then in that case that someone is acting live, and what you're asking of the audio system is very different from the music experience. The audio system is designed to essentially slightly, sometimes enhance, but complement the vocal performance on the stage, the acting performance on the stage. Which means that, it's not really the same as Mariah Carey belting out a hit, and it's the microphones there are just to slightly enhance the voice so that the voice can carry within the space. They're not looking to blast it out. So then what the Atmos system has to do is very different, because you're looking at it from a supporting role in setting an environment, a scene, a stage. The goal is for it to, in some ways, almost to sit slightly in the background, because it's creating the environment that you're watching the performance in a way that's natural, that you don't really think about. Almost the same as if you were walking down the street and you heard the sounds of the world round about you. You don't fixate in those or think of them in different spaces. You just experience them. So that was the role of Dolby Atmos for King Lear, although we did, for the first time, use motion trackers, so that as the actors moved across the stage, you could actually track them correctly across the stage as objects. Each of the actors were objects with their little tracking packs. And that was actually very unique and interesting as well, because, again, the way we design the Dolby Atmos system, it meant that someone who came from stage left, the voice would project across to the right side of the room. Very different sound design use case and technology use case, because everything is driven by third-party tools. There's very little in that performance. Everything was playback tracks. Everything was as created. And in fact, we were already working off of a show that had been very successful in London. They'd already done a run in London. So a lot of the sound design was being adapted for Dolby Atmos. So a completely different methodology of using it. And that's things that we're talking to other now Broadway sound designers about as well, about how can we utilize Dolby Atmos now for Broadway shows. And so, there's a couple of things we've got in the work that I can't talk about, but it's really about how can we, really provide this ability to utilize the technology again to enhance what's happening on the stage. And that was I think the biggest compliment that we got from the King Lear was the sound designer saying, he wasn't quite sure how we'd use it, and now he wished he'd used it more, and how it really was an incredible enhancement and support to the storytelling on the stage, which is the goal of the technology, right? Is to enhance and to help the storytelling, not to overpower it, but to enhance it. And we always get questions about esports. Esports is always something that people are interested in, because they're on stage. There's all these screens up there. The games, and many times, are in Dolby Atmos for the PC or the console. So I always engaged with those people too. And we've also done one-up pop-ups. We've done something for South by Southwest. We did something for Verse in LA, which is a restaurant attached to a well-known recording studio, Larrabee Studios. We did an event with Mercedes-Benz and some of the artists that Alicia Keys manages. We've done things at IBC. So we're always doing sort of one-up pop-ups. but always taking it. I get more inbound inquiries of people saying they would like to do crazy and wacky things, which is fantastic because people are excited about what we're doing. The challenge is trying to figure out what are the right opportunities to take, right? Because there's a lot still going on, and there's more things that we're hoping to grow into, and really just understanding, where even with the best world in the world, you can't fulfill everything, and it's really sort of trying to help people do the things that are going to make the most sense, which is where King Lear came in. That was literally Sir Ken coming to us and saying he wanted to do this, and like, well, when Sir Ken comes and says he wants to do it because he's been a huge supporter of Atmos in the cinema, your ears pick up, you take notice, and honestly, we figured out how to make it work. The tools weren't quite ready at the time when he asked us, but we worked really hard and we got it working, and it worked flawlessly, and everyone was very happy. So there is lots of different ways that it can be used. And it's the age-old phrase of, walk, step, crawl, walk, run. We're now in the walk process, and the run will be when we're, doing multiple different types of content in different ways. But because we only develop our tools based on content, creative feedback, we don't sell this tool. The Atmos for Live panner and the render and everything you can't buy it. It's provided for people who are doing performances or shows or productions in Dolby Atmos. So it means that we literally take all of that feedback from those sound designers from Broadway, from Mariah Carey's front of house engineer, from Usher, from all these people, and we actually push those in and we decide what are the requirements, what are the things that we need to do to make it better. That's a huge blessing, because then you really are targeting how you make the tools better based on creative feedback. I'm not having to say to people, well, we have to make this for $14.99 and here's a bomb list and everything like that. You really have that fortunate in the way in which we do our business and we work. We can focus the tools really on what's most important for the creative and not develop things that don't matter.
Which goes back to the spirit of the company and from our founding days, offering and creating tools for creatives. And one thing we know for sure is that these artists and their creative teams are going to continue to push the boundaries, and we're going to, iterate on the tool set based on their needs to create an amazing experience for the consumers and the fans that end up being able to have the luxury and pleasure to experience these things. And so your team and you are doing such a fantastic job to deliver these amazing experiences. Thank you for joining us to share all of this. Really appreciate it, Mark.
No, it's my pleasure, Ben. And I just hope, everybody get the chance, go to Vegas, go to Dolby Live, enjoy a show. I might even see you there.
Awesome. And you'll stick around to answer some questions?
Absolutely, I will.
All right. Excited to welcome everyone back, and thank you everyone for all of the great questions as always. We're going to go to about quarter past the hour here to hit as many of these as we can, and we answered many of them in the chat session. So again, thank you for all of those great questions. And here we go. Mark, I'm going to start with you. This one is from Tim, and he is asking, what is the scalability? How big versus how small? And I'm guessing he's talking, of course, about live experiences and how they can scale across venue sizes.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. Good question. The easy way to say is it scales. That's the beauty of Dolby Atmos. The beauty of Dolby Atmos is that you have the metadata and it can scale up and down. The venue, which ironically I'm looking at right now, is about 5,500 people. When we did our proof of concept at House of Blues, that was about 1,300 was the House of Blues at Mandalay Bay. There isn't a limit down or up. That generally just then becomes the scale of the audio system that actually goes at how many speakers and how loud. We haven't gone over a venue capacity of 9,000 just now because we're being careful about when you go up to arena level, mega arena level, there may be some different things that we have to think about just in terms of venue physics and delay. So but there's not really theoretically a limit up or down.
Cool. Thank you, Mark. Greg, going to throw this one to you. And we get this one a lot, but we'll be sure to pop some links into the resources. Matthew's asking, what are the basic or minimum software applications needed for Atmos production? And I'm guessing he's talking about, mixing and music production.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Matthew. And yeah, if your question is really around what's needed for actual production, studio production, music production, really a DAW. And if that DAW already has integrated rendering, Pro Tools, Apple Logic Pro, Steinberg, Nuendo, Cubase, Persona Studio One, etc. The list continues to grow. Then you've got pretty much what you need. However, we have the Dolby Atmos Renderer as well. If you want to use that in conjunction with a DAW along with a music panner. But that's pretty, and if you want to get started, at home with your laptop, a pair of headphones, and you're good to go in terms of getting started. Of course, things scale, which is coming back to the scale thing, as you go out and want to do more.
Great, thank you, Greg. Mark, over to you. A question from Alok, and it's more of a statement, but I think he's asking a question. How do you manage time alignment of the venue and limits? Maybe you talked a little bit about that in the discussion that we have, but maybe just touching on that one more time.
Yes, we break the venue down into smaller chunks is the easiest way of saying it. And so we actually work on time aligning each one of those areas. So for example, underneath the balcony, it's broken up into areas, and each one of those are time aligned. The main floor is the one space where we have the most speakers, but even then we break that down. So we really spend a lot of time in understanding how much of the venue do we have to cover with a particular set of speakers to limit the problems of time alignment.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Greg, over to you for one from Gulio. When switching from Atmos to 5.1 for a film or TV project, is there a way to make all surround speakers play the stereo surround? He goes on to say, in my studio, there's only rear left and rear right playing when I choose 5.1, but it would be much more realistic if side and rear surrounds would play. So he wants everything when he's listening.
Yeah, so it's not quite a simple answer. I mean, the simplest answer would be to say no, because you're dealing with discrete outputs. However, I'm sure that there are some ways, probably using some software, to kind of take an output and redirect that output to another speaker. It probably exists. I'm not specifically aware of anything like that, but do remember that in terms of your DAW and your I/O settings, and as well as if you're using the Dolby Atmos Renderer, everything is managed discreetly in terms of output.
Great, thank you, Greg. We got a question from Mark Weber, and I'm going to ask Mark to add his question again or do some clarifying on this. And I'll also pop a link in for him to ask this question, and it's around using Dolby Access and specifically recording the binaural output of that. I'm going to just pop our Access support site link into the chat unless anybody would like to make a comment about that. I think this would probably be the best place to get that answered. Moving on, Mark, from our buddy McKay. Many of us would love to hear about options for Atmos in smaller live venues and any successful scenarios for temporary installs for short show runs. I know the Elisa seems to support conversion for use on their rigs, but would love to know about other resources.
Yeah, so we have done small engagements. We've done even one-off shows as well. And again, it just depends on the size of the venue. It's actually less about pre-production and less about the technology. It's actually more about the time to load in and get something and load out. So we did, as I said, did something at South by Southwest. That was a bring in and bring out. We've done stuff at IBC. We did a thing down at Verse for one of our partners, Mercedes, and those were very quick in-out things as well. So we have had people that have talked to us about wanting to do it. And also, to be honest, not a fantastic technical question, but a lot of times it comes down to the business, because it's about, it takes, the cost of renting something, and then, how you're actually working with that partner. There's nothing that prevents it. You can do shorter residencies. It really just comes down to, is it going to make sense for everybody from a financial perspective? Not the great technical question, I'm sure, but, it has a lot to do with that.
Yep, thank you. This is kind of a general question, I suppose, Mark, and I know we've touched on a lot of this, but we'll address Anthony's question. I want to know about the setup moving from studio to live.
Yes. So it's actually, when we do our pre-production, very much we look at it from I use it from a small, medium, large sort of perspective. We sort of think of that. So a lot of places we start with the kind of setups that Greg is very, common and Jordan work with. You start with a studio, because people can create, if they're going to be doing stuff for backing tracks, they can actually create backing tracks. Some acts use them, some don't. So you can actually start already in a studio and building up the backing tracks there, and then we bring them into larger spaces. So it all really depends on the act. So we do have people who have actually worked on Atmos albums, and they are working, and they can actually bring some of those DAW tracks right into the system in Dolby Live, because we can partition the inputs of the renderer differently depending on, do you have playback tracks, and is the automation, is it DAW, the metadata coming from the DAW, or are they live tracks, and you do it that way. So we can partition out our inputs that way. So you can do it directly. For the live stuff, you could start off in a smaller space, but then we bring them into progressively bigger spaces, because there are creative choices you're probably going to do differently in a large space than you would do in a studio. So it's nice. You can literally take something that Greg's worked on. You could take some tracks that Greg's worked on and want it for backing. You could just bring those straight into the Dolby Live, and then you might want to tweak them once you're there, because there may be a few things you want to do, but you can do that. It's the same technology. A lot of people use Pro Tools, use Ableton, they use things like that at Live, and you can absolutely do that.
Awesome, thank you, Jordan. Over to you for one from Zahir. What is the last update for Dolby Atmos? But I think he means Atmos. And what's next?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Dolby Atmos Renderer version 5.3.1 just came out yesterday, I believe it was, and that offers some new compatibility updates and bug fixes. We're working on lots of stuff in the background that I can't quite mention yet. Another thing that's pretty recent is we added a new DAW to the family of DAWs that support native Dolby Atmos rendering, and that is Magic Sequoia version 17. So very happy to have them in the Atmos family.
That's awesome. Thank you. Gregory Ives says that he's going to be at NAB, so he'll look out for you. I believe, Jordan, you're going to be there?
Yeah, come say hi. I'll be there Sunday and Monday.
Awesome. Mark, over to you for one. And Justin also submitted this in the chat. So he's very interested to know if the Atmos Live implementation supports integration with performer tracking systems.
Yes, so performer trackers, when we worked with Kenneth Branner, Sir Ken, I should say, in New York with King Lear, that was one of the requests from that production team. And so we worked with them to make something work with their particular tools. They had a very specific tool set that they were working with. So we figured out a way to make that work. It's actually something that we are looking at in the future for actually integrating. But currently, as I look at Dolby Live over there, it's not in Dolby Live. There's different tools that were used for content creation and things as well. So not currently within Dolby Live, but it is something that we are investigating to see. Honestly, obviously, is there interest from the acts as well? Because it's not just a technical thing, it's whether there's actually interest in the acts of utilizing it.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Jesse asks, and I can take this one, can you share a session in your I/O settings that include a binaural monitoring path for working in headphones? And Jesse, great question. There actually is a template at the Dolby Atmos Essentials course, which is at learning.dolby.com. But I also have to give a shout out to my colleague, John Scanlon, who has just done some additional videos that feature some headphone monitoring paths. So I'm going to pop those into the chat, and you can definitely check those out as well. Great stuff as always from John. You get a big up Stryke, Greg, from Kevin Moon from Canada, sending you a shout. Mark, I think you touched on this a little bit, but Adam's asking, are there any plans to make Dolby Atmos Live more accessible for experimentation, testing in smaller venues?
So my job literally is to grow that business and have it in venues. So there is plans to actually roll it out into different spaces, and again, not limited by the size of them. So that all I can say is, watch this space.
Excellent. Thank you. Our buddy Sam is asking, what makes Dolby Live special? Is it the immersive experience, the spectacle of the event, the audio and sound design of the show? And how can I, as an artist and creator, create content to be played back at Dolby Live?
The answer is yes to all of those. It's all of those. It starts, obviously, and I think all of my colleagues here would say that it starts with the artist and the creative intent that they are doing. Remember, we're providing these amazing tools and technologies for people to create something. So that's where it starts from. But the ability for the artists to then provide something in a way that they've never been able to do before live, that's what makes it the incredible experience that's in the venue. And also the fact that, as I said in the video, We designed the system so it doesn't matter where you sit in that venue, you're going to get an amazing Atmos experience. That was paramount, for me. It was very important for me. So I would say, obviously, you start with the creative, is how they're able to use the tools and technology to provide something that's really unique, and the design that we put into the venue. A lot of care and effort went into there, because when the Dolby name is on the side of the building, that stands for something that's an experience that we're actually, promising. And my goal was to make sure we delivered on that. So it's everything.
Nice. And Ellis's question, Mark, is kind of taking that a step further, but kind of along the same lines. And you touched on this a little bit earlier too, but what pre-production can be done to facilitate a live Atmos mix? Goes on to ask, could it be done in a film mixing stage, assuming that Avid hardware would be compatible for the live performance?
Yes. So, and I forgot, I didn't answer part of the previous question. They both tie in. For pre-production, generally what we do is we start off and we'll bring someone to a Dolby facility. And actually, a lot of times we use our 1275 cinema, which is actually a Dolby cinema. And it's a sort of a unique one because it's a working lab, and it has a whole load of extra elements that are in there as well, maybe slightly more higher performing than a traditional cinema. So we bring people in there. So you could do that there, because generally when you're starting off your console session, right? What are you actually placing? How are you splitting things up? How are you bussing it? How are you routing it? What are you wanting as an object? What are you going to have as a bed? And you can start doing that. And then because we provide the tools for someone to work on remotely themselves, they can continue to tinker on that, because really it's about the spatiality and the movement and things that you want to do. You're not concerned in that case about how it sounds, because of course you're going to have to work on some of that when you're in a venue. So we start there, and then we go to rehearsal, and then we bring this rig for rehearsal so that people can work on it as well. So it's very much around about, how you're going to set up your console session, using virtual sound checks, because you've got those. So you can use a virtual sound check, and you can actually start building things up and say, I want the guitar to do this and this. So that's really how we work. Virtual sound checks, console files, getting the console set up and getting the session for the Atmos Live established, and then you can iterate on that in rehearsal, and then when you go to the venue, you can tweak the same way you have to tweak anyway, because it's a new space, and you're going to have to tweak the mix anyway just to get things the way you want.
Awesome, thanks. And we'll end with Nathan, who has a couple of questions here, Mark, so I'll just kind of ask them one at a time here. What live consoles are currently supported for controlling live music in Atmos? I know you touched on this a little bit. He's specifically asking about using an Allen and Heath D-Live.
Basically, all consoles are compatible, because we don't actually do anything integrated into the console. That was a specific choice. We looked at it, and we spent a lot of time we actually had a council of front of house engineers that we worked with, and asked them, what's the best way that you would want this done? And the request came for touchpad control. So we actually made the choice of having everything that Dolby Atmos related on essentially a touch screen device, and not in the console, because then it means that for you as a mix engineer, you don't have to worry about some strange, menu inside the console or doing anything. You're focused there at doing the things you normally do. It also means that you can use the things that you're used to, your compressing, your EQ, anything you want in the console. And it's actually really then the iPad control that's used for automation, programming, and everything. And that's been really well received by everyone, because you can take advantage of a lot of the functionality that a touchscreen device can do. And there's a lot of complex things you can do that are not easy to do on a console. So the easy answer is every console, because we're not integrating anything in any of them just now. So nice and easy.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Second part of this, and it's a two-parter in and of itself. Is it possible to use the live renderer in both front of house and broadcast applications? 2, can it generate a real-time stereo and binaural mix down for streaming?
Not for broadcast. It's actually designed. We had to create some very specific elements for live performance that are not suitable for broadcast. So you would use the traditional broadcast tools for doing that. The renderer itself is capable of providing re-renders, that in the same way that our cinema tools are, the same way that it's based on the stuff that Jordan's been doing. So there's all of those functionalities you can do. Generally, we've utilized it for doing some of those for Dolby Live, because as I showed, there's particular zones that you want to do stuff, and people have asked us about that. But a lot of times, to be honest, for the front of house engineer at that time, there's so much going on that they really, that's not something that they're worrying about at that time. But
it can technically do it. There's nothing that prevents it from doing that.
Awesome. Thanks. And last one for you here from Nathan. And this is kind of in line with, using the console that you are most comfortable with or the one that you'd like. He's saying, please confirm what equipment is needed and at what price point, especially compared to Soundscape, Elisa, Constellation.
So what's unique about the way that Dolby works on this is that there's not actually a product you can buy for Atmos for Live. There's not a processor that you could go to, insert your favorite integrator here or store and purchase. And we actually provide an entire what we call experiential solution. So it's the audio system, the rendering, there's support that we provide as well. So it's actually not a product that you can go and buy. And there's a real reason for that, because we are very much involved in wanting to make sure that you get the best experience possible. And it's not just about putting a product in and doing it. So we work directly with a venue. So that's why you won't actually see this. In fact, you'll be wondering, where can I find the app for doing this? Or you can't just go in the app store and get the app for doing it. We provide it through private distribution because it's used by people who are performing at a Dolby Atmos for Live venue. So it's a slightly different way of operating. It's not a product, it's actually a program, and it's provided as part of that overall solution.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jordan, for all this amazing insight and wisdom. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. And with that, we will come to a close. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers.